By the mid-12th century, the Holy Roman Empire was an empire in name only. For 25 years, the crown had no real resources beyond the king's personal lands, while rival Welf and Hohenstaufen dynasties fought for local control. This political vacancy allowed the German princes to act as independent sovereigns, ignoring the throne entirely. Frederick of Swabia ended that vacancy. Elected in 1152, because his bloodline linked both warring families, he immediately issued a general order for peace. He spent the first months of his reign making lavish concessions to some nobles while physically forcing others into submission, rapidly centralizing a power base that had been dormant for decades. He spent years carefully associating his image with that of Charlemagne. He organized a grand celebration for Charlemagne's canonization and commissioned this, the Barbarossa chandelier. It hangs directly over Charlemagne's tomb in Aachen, a permanent, golden reminder that Frederick claimed the same divine authority as the first emperor. This authority extended to the Church. Frederick was the first to officially attach the word holy to his Roman Empire, asserting that his power came directly from God, not the Pope. He backed this claim with 5 military expeditions into Italy, installing his own candidates for the papacy, and destroying the cities that resisted his tax collectors. By middle age, Frederick had achieved a rare level of dominance. He had transformed the German monarchy from a nominal title into a centralized state, governed by Roman law and led by a ruler who presented himself as the supreme temporal power on earth. In 1187, Saladin captured Jerusalem. The loss of the city shocked the Christian world, triggering a call for a Third Crusade to reclaim the holy sites Frederick had first visited as a young man 40 years earlier. At the age of 68, Frederick took up the cross. He spent over a year settling his affairs of state and organizing what would be the most meticulously planned military expedition of the medieval era. This chart shows the scale of the force Frederick gathered. While previous crusades relied on disjointed noble factions, Frederick marched with up to 20,000 men, including 4,000 heavy knights. It was a professional army, financed by a general tax and governed by strict imperial discipline. Instead of hiring a fleet, Frederick chose the grueling overland route. The army marched down the Danube, through Hungary and the Balkans, a journey of thousands of miles that required the force to remain unified and supplied while crossing through often hostile territory. For Frederick, this was the final act of his reign. He was risking the stability of his empire and his own life on a single march to the Levant, attempting to achieve what no Western ruler had done since the First Crusade. The order of the march collapsed when the army entered the Sultanate of Rum. The Seljuk Turks used scorched earth tactics, burning crops and destroying wells ahead of the German advance. Within days, the army's supply lines vanished, and their livestock began to starve. The physical toll was immediate. In the May heat, knights in heavy iron mail suffered from constant dehydration. Men were reduced to drinking horse blood to survive, while foot soldiers deserted or died by the hundreds along the mountain passes of Anatolia. Seljuk forces harassed the column for weeks. They avoided a direct battle, instead using light cavalry to launch arrows and javelins into the slow-moving German rearguard. These hit-and-run attacks were designed to bleed the army of its morale and its remaining horses. By the time they reached the Seljuk capital of Iconium, the survivors were exhausted. Chroniclers described the soldiers as appearing as though they had been exhumed from their graves, yet Frederick insisted on a direct assault to secure the city's grain and water. The march had transformed the imperial host. The discipline of the German states had been replaced by a raw desperation, as the most powerful army in Europe fought simply to reach the next water source. Outside the walls of Konya, the army faced the main Seljuk field force. Frederick personally led his remaining heavy cavalry in a charge that broke the Turkish lines. The Crusaders sacked the capital, replenishing their supplies, and taking high-ranking nobles as hostages to ensure their safe passage to the coast. The victory at Iconium shifted the momentum of the entire crusade. In Syria, Saladin began dismantling the walls of his coastal fortresses, fearing that Frederick's army was now an unstoppable force that would soon arrive to join the siege of Acre. But the army never arrived. On June 10, 1190, the emperor attempted to cross the Saleph River. Accounts differ on whether he was thrown from his horse or went in for a swim to cool down, but the result was the same. The man who had survived 30 years of war drowned in a river his soldiers could cross on foot. His death paralyzed the crusade. Without a central leader, the German princes began to quarrel. They attempted to preserve the emperor's body in vinegar so he could be buried in Jerusalem, but the process failed. His remains were eventually scattered, his flesh in Antioch, his bones in Tyre, and his heart in Tarsus. Most of the army abandoned the expedition and sailed for home. The most powerful man in Europe had spent 2 years planning his ultimate victory, only to have it ended by a few feet of water in a mountain gorge. For the survivors, Frederick's death was a theological crisis. A bad death without final confession was seen as a sign of divine abandonment. If Frederick was God's chosen champion, his sudden, accidental drowning suggested that the entire crusade, and perhaps the emperor himself, was flawed in the eyes of heaven. This realization was too devastating for many to accept. If the emperor was truly dead, the divine order he had promised for Germany was gone. People began to question the reports from the East, struggling to reconcile the image of the invincible leader with the news of a body rotting in vinegar. Within decades, the reality of the river was replaced by a myth. Folklore claimed that Frederick hadn't died at all. Instead, he vanished into a cave in the Kyffhauser Mountains, where he sat in a trance, his red beard slowly growing through a stone table. The legend grew specific. The emperor was waiting for Germany's hour of greatest need. He would only wake and emerge to restore the empire's glory when the ravens stopped circling the mountain peak. The sleeping king became a necessary story. It allowed a population that had staked its identity on Frederick's strength to believe that their protector was merely absent, rather than lost to a mundane accident. The legend survived into the 19th century, where it found a new purpose. Romantic writers and the Brothers Grimm revived the story of the Kyffhauser, turning the medieval emperor into a symbol of a lost, unified German identity that was waiting to be reborn. During the struggle for German unification, nationalists used the myth to build support for a new empire. They argued that the old empire of the Hohenstaufens was finally ready to wake up and take its place as a modern nation-state. When Wilhelm I became the first Kaiser of a unified Germany in 1871, he was presented as the fulfillment of the prophecy. Government imagery positioned Wilhelm as the man who had finally woken the sleeping Barbarossa, completing the work the Crusade had started 7 centuries earlier. This is the Kyffhauser Monument, built to celebrate the new Reich. At the base, you see Frederick Barbarossa finally waking up, but he is positioned directly beneath a massive statue of Wilhelm I. The monument physically ties the ancient myth to the modern Kaiser's authority. Cedric Barbarossa's actual reign ended in a river in Anatolia, but by refusing to accept that ending, his subjects and their descendants built a political image that proved more durable than his actual empire, lasting 1,000 years beyond his death.